So what are the settings on my camera to get the great photos that I take? Whoa, blowing your own trumpet. So I work in full manual mode. I started off back in the day in aperture priority. So over the years, I figured out what settings I needed to get those shots that I missed in aperture priority. Now, one of the worst ones is when a bird is flying against the sky. Now, generally, unless you're very lucky and the bird is filling most of the frame, the camera is going to expose for the sky first. More expensive cameras might handle it a lot better. The worst thing that happens is basically your bird just gets silhouetted. Now, what I do is when I arrive at a scene, I set my camera up with 3 custom function settings depending on the lighting conditions. In one of my custom functions, I set the shutter speed at 3200th of a second and ISO 1000. Now that's blue skies, sunlight, and no clouds. That will take care of most birds. It won't take care of blackbirds and whitebirds because that's going to mean faster or slower shutter speeds. But the things that most photographers, most bird photographers are after are, you know, raptors, warblers, things like that. Things that have a bit of color to them, a bit of range of color. They're not going to have any blown out highlights or dark shadows with no detail. So most of us are going for that. So that's my first setting. Now, if it's really bright and a white bird does fly over and I do want to take a picture of it, I'll go up to 1/4000th or 1/4500th of a second. And if it's something like a cormorant or a raven or something, then I'll either put the ISO up to 1250, 1600, or I'll bring the shutter speed down to 1/2000th, 1/2500th of a second, depending on the speed of the bird. If it's gliding, then you don't need a fast shutter speed. You just have to pan at the same speed as the bird. Then another custom function I'll program in will be if a bird lands on a post, I'm going to want low ISO for maximum detail and low noise, and a shutter speed that takes care of the image stabilizer. Now I normally keep one custom function as 1/400th of a second and 400 ISO. And when the bird lands, I judge the lighting scenario and adjust up the ISO or down the shutter speed, what I think I can get away with in the conditions. Is it windy, whatever. So those are 2 custom functions. I've got one for birds that take off in flight and other ones that land on a post. Now my third custom function, I'll program in approximately 1/2000th of a second and 2000 ISO. Now that is for this sort of a situation, actually just now, where the cloud goes over the sun and it's still bright, but I need a bit more light and the shutter speed's going to be lower. And I will risk that on slower moving birds. If it's something smaller and I know it's going to take off, then I'll risk it and put the ISO up to 4000 if necessary. But I put those on custom functions on my camera. Everybody's camera will have different custom functions, number of custom functions, and will have different abilities, different lenses. On mine, I have 3. I can program in the 3 I need for the current conditions. That's if I'm out and about. If I'm in a forest, if I'm in a wood, if it's cloudy, if it's winter, if it's near dusk, if it's near dawn, I'm going to have to program in different features. Now, this does require a lot more input, but over the years, you just get better. Your muscle memory responds better. I can now change settings on my camera without even looking at it. I noticed it was on my last holiday where I spent many hours a day for about the 10 days we were there, just taking bird photos. And I got back to the UK and I realized I was changing settings on the camera without even looking, turning the dial left or right, hitting the ISO button, flicking from custom function 1 to custom function 3. I was like, whoa, it just becomes muscle memory. And you're going to need that, because the thing is, the reason I've chosen to keep the camera set for birds taking off 1/3200th of a second and ISO 1000 is because if the bird takes off in these kind of conditions, it might slightly underexpose near the ground, and it might slightly overexpose as it flies around you. But for the most part, you've got more chance of it being exposed properly if you read the lighting conditions and you understand them. Again, those numbers are for my camera only goes to f9. It won't go down any lower unless I zoom it back. It's the RF 200 to 800 millimeter. So I'm restricted in that sense. If you've got an f2.8 or an f4, lucky you, nice lens, then you can go down to like ISO 400. Fantastic. But I don't have that. So, and if you've got an expensive camera, it'll be able to handle lower lighting conditions better. But this is my setup, the R7 and the RF 200 to 800 millimeter. I mean, set your camera up how you want it, but those are my settings for getting the shots I'm after. I'm usually, like I said, I keep my camera ready for a bird taking off and catching it in flight, because anything else you can muck around with the settings while it's perched or it's coming in from a distance in a few seconds. But when you need the camera ready for a bird taking off, you need to program settings for the current lighting conditions. I'll do a future video on taking photos in woods and dark conditions with a slow F number like I have. So I've told you everything I do when I'm outside in nice clear conditions, but what happens when I go into a wood? So that's going to alter the settings massively. No flight shots, out of the question. Depending on if it's overcast and there's still a bit of light and there are no leaves on the trees, depending on the time of year, summer, probably no chance. And also with the leaves in the branches, it just means that you get this really harsh mottled sunlight and shadow pattern from the leaves that just makes photographing in woods completely pointless in the summertime. So I mean, ideally we'd be better in the winter because all the leaves are gone. And I will use electronic shutter. I'm lucky enough to have a R7, which is a mirrorless camera, and this is the benefit, because before this I had the Canon 90D with a Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens, and that had a mechanical shutter. Mechanical shutter is the mirror going choo, 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 choo. That causes vibrations, which causes you to have blurry shots. The benefit of mirrorless is you can use the electronic shutter mode, which there is no movement, so you can go all the way down to, I've gone down to 1/25th of a second and just about got away with it, just about got something usable once I'd sharpened it up and removed the noise later. But generally I stick to about 1/100th of a second and maybe 2000 ISO in the wood, and I will judge the lighting conditions and go up or down from there. And if I need to go to 1/50th of a second, that's generally, if I fire off 20 or 30 shots per second on the high speed frame rate for about 3 or 4 seconds, 1 or 2 of those shots will generally be sharp, as long as I'm holding everything pretty tight and not moving the camera around. And birds, even a firecrest or a goldcrest, will sit still for half a second or 1 second. And in that time, you can get off like 30 shots, like I said. So yeah, when I had the Sigma, like I said, I couldn't go below 1/320th of a second. I tried 1/250th. Nah, didn't want to know. Every single time, blurry photos. So yeah, I've told you everything from the outside now, everything from the inside. Of course, if you have a full frame camera and an f2.8 or an f4 lens, you might just be able to get some flight shots in there, but it would have to be the bigger birds. They're almost impossible. I mean, yeah, you could ramp it up to 10,000, 12,000 ISO. I've said this before. Apparently, I don't own a full frame, but if you've got a crop sensor like me, the pixels are close together, causes more heat. That is a woodpecker, I think. Anyway, getting distracted here. The pixels closer together cause more heat, which causes more noise. Full frame, the pixels are further apart, less heat. And from what I've been told online, you can get away with almost double the ISO on a full frame camera than you could on a cropped. So yeah, if you go in there with a full frame camera and an f4 400mm, you might be able to get some flight shots at like 10,000 ISO. And again, I can't cover all the bases. Now, obviously, I'm only outlining some basics here because through the year, things will change dramatically. In the summer, there are leaves everywhere, which mean it will get very, very dark. In the winter, things get a bit brighter, funnily enough, because there are no leaves on the trees and the sun can get through. So I'm showing you some of the images I've taken in the last few months with this camera, some firecrest, goldcrest, jays, things like that. But again, it's always been stationary birds, no flight shots for me with this setup, completely different from the outside here. So I hope that's given you some idea of how to set your camera up if you go my way of the manual settings, because I am completely manual. I don't use any auto modes. The light changes so much. You might think, yeah, but that's so much to remember. Unfortunately, that's the case. You've just got to get really good. Your muscle memory's got to get quicker. And over the years, you will get quicker. And nobody's figured out the secret. Some people stick with shutter priority, aperture priority. Some go full manual. I just prefer full manual. Again, I hope this has been helpful. Any questions, let me know in the comments. Thank you.